You know how it is these days, just streams of information coming at you constantly.
Absolutely. It's overwhelming.
And you just want to get to the core, the stuff that actually makes sense.
Okay.
That's what we try to do here.
Exactly. We do the deep dive for you, pull out the key insights.
Hopefully help you get straight to those aha moments without wading through everything yourself.
That's the goal.
So today we've got this interesting little puzzle. Seems simple. It's from Marcus Huck's work. It involves a girl, Lisa, her uncle Andreas, his wife Andrea, and their daughter Anna. All at a playground, sort of.
Right. Seems like a basic little story. But
Yeah.
the thing is, it's actually a brilliant way to unpack two, well, fundamentally different ways of thinking about logic, about understanding itself.
And those ways of thinking come from two giants of Western philosophy.
Aristotle and Hegel. Our mission today is basically to use this playground scenario as a springboard.
A springboard to explore their contrasting ideas. Okay, let's set that up. Aristotle first.
Sure. Aristotle, he's pretty much the father of what we call formal logic.
Think clear categories. Things are either true or they're false, black or white.
Exactly. His big thing was avoiding contradictions.
Yeah.
You have the law of non-contradiction.
Which just means something can't be, say, both a bike and not a bike at the same time, in the same way.
Precisely. And the law of excluded middle.
Meaning it has to be either a bike or not a bike. There's no third option, no murky middle ground.
Right. Very clear cut. Then, fast forward quite a bit, and you get Hegel.
And he's got a totally different angle.
Completely. He talks about the dialectic, the idea that understanding actually grows through grappling with contradiction.
Like a conversation.
Yeah.
Thesis, antithesis.
And then synthesis,
Yeah.
exactly. For Hegel, contradictions aren't just errors to be stamped out. They're often the very engine driving us to a deeper, more nuanced understanding.
And he has that concept, Aufhebung.
Yes, Aufhebung. It's a tricky German word to translate directly. It kind of means to negate something, but also to preserve its truth and then to lift it all up to a higher level.
Negate, preserve, elevate. Okay. We can unpack that.
Definitely.
All right, so with those two frameworks, Aristotle's clear lines, Hegel's messy process, let's lay out the puzzle itself.
Okay.
So Lisa is at the playground. Her uncle Andreas sees her wearing a helmet.
Just sees the helmet. Okay.
Later, Andreas tells his wife, Andrea, Lisa is at the playground with a helmet. Simple enough.
Seems like it.
But then Andrea tells their daughter, Anna, something slightly different. She says, your cousin is at the playground with her bicycle.
Ah, okay. So Andrea made a little leap there. Helmet implies bicycle.
Seems so. But then Anna throws a wrench in the works. She replies, Lisa's bicycle is in our garage.
Oh, okay. Direct contradiction, seemingly.
Right. So the questions are, where's the bike? Where's Lisa now? And did anyone actually say something false?
And there's one more detail. Just as Anna says, the bike's in the garage.
Lisa appears.
Yeah.
Right from behind Anna.
Perfect timing.
So the core confusion, the head-scratcher, is that apparent contradiction. Andrea implies bike at playground. Anna says bike in garage. How can both be right?
Exactly. And this is where you can really see how differently Aristotle and Hegel would tackle this whole situation.
Let's start with Aristotle then. How does his formal logic handle this?
Well, Aristotle would immediately focus on the statements themselves, the propositions.
Like Lisa's on the playground or Lisa's bike is in the garage.
Right. He'd want to analyze these as distinct claims about reality. And he'd insist on clear terms. We all agree on who Lisa is, what playground means, what bicycle means.
To avoid any ambiguity.
Crucial for his logic. Then those laws we mentioned kick in, law of non-contradiction.
The bike can't be both at the playground and in the garage at the exact same instant.
Correct. And the law of excluded middle.
It's either the playground or it's not. One or the other must be true.
So let's break down the statements Aristotelian style. Key 1. Lisa was on the playground. That seems okay based on Andreas seeing her.
Right. P2, Andrea saw a helmet. Also factual.
Then, Andrea's inference, leading to C1, Lisa is, or was, with her bicycle at the playground. This comes from Andrea connecting helmet to bike.
And finally, P3, Anna's statement. Lisa's bicycle is in our garage. Presented as a direct observation.
Okay, so the direct clash is between C1, bike at playground, based on Andrea's inference, and P3, bike in garage, based on Anna's observation.
That's the contradiction Aristotle needs to resolve. How does he do it?
Since C1 and P3 can't both be true at the same time, his approach is to figure out which statement is false.
Okay, how would he weigh them?
He'd look at the basis for each claim. C1, the idea the bike is at the playground, stems from Andrea seeing the helmet, and Andrea assuming that means bike.
But that's an assumption, isn't it? Helmets could mean scooter, skateboard?
Exactly. It's an inference and potentially a weak one. It's not logically necessary that helmet equals bicycle.
Okay, what about P3, Anna saying the bike's in the garage?
That's presented as a direct observation. I see the bike in the garage. In Aristotelian terms, direct empirical evidence generally carries more weight than an inference, especially a shaky one.
So Aristotle would likely conclude that C1, the statement derived from Andreas' assumption, is the false one.
Most likely, yes. The bike is in the garage. P3 is true. Therefore, the implied claim that it's at the playground, C1, must be false. The contradiction is resolved by identifying the false statement.
Problem solved. Bike's in the garage? Simple.
Logically, yes, it identifies the likely error, but this is where the limitations start to show up for this kind of dynamic puzzle.
What limitations? It seems pretty straightforward.
Well, first, it doesn't really handle the time element very well, does it? Andreas saw Lisa earlier. Anna's talking about the bike now, or very recently.
Ah, right. Aristotle's logic is more about static truth, true or false, period. Not so much true then, false now.
Exactly. It struggles with that kind of temporal shift. His logic often deals with timeless truths or evaluating statements at a single point in time.
It misses the unfolding story.
And it also kind of struggles with the different perspectives. Andreas had one piece of info, Andrea inferred, Anna had another piece. Aristotle focuses on finding the one objective truth, rather than explaining how the confusion itself arose from these partial views and the sequence of events.
Yeah, it feels like you said, just looking at one frame of a movie,
Yeah.
you miss the plot, how things changed.
Right. It simplifies, perhaps oversimplifies this kind of situation.
Okay, so if Aristotle's approach feels a bit too static, too focused on just finding the error, how does Hegel come at this? His whole dialectic thing sounds way more fluid.
It absolutely is. For Hegel, this kind of apparent contradiction isn't a sign of failure. It's the point. It's how understanding deepens.
So the confusion itself is important.
Very important. He saw dialectic as the process by which thought, history, even reality itself develops. It moves forward by encountering and resolving these tensions. Truth isn't static, it evolves.
Through that thesis, antithesis, synthesis structure we mentioned.
That's the common way to explain it. Yeah, it captures the movement. So let's apply that framework here. What's the thesis?
The thesis.
Yeah.
The starting point. That would be Andreas' initial conclusion, passed on by Andrea. Lisa's at the playground with her bike, based on the helmet.
Right. An initial, perhaps limited understanding based on the available evidence at that moment. Okay, then the antithesis.
That's the opposing idea, the challenge. So Anna's saying, nope, the bike's in our garage.
Exactly. The negation. It creates tension, conflict with the thesis. This tension is crucial. It demands resolution.
And that resolution is the synthesis.
Yes. The synthesis isn't just picking one side. It's about integrating the valid insights from both the thesis and the antithesis into a richer, more comprehensive understanding.
Okay, and how does that Aufhebung idea negate, preserve, elevate, fit into the synthesis?
It describes how the synthesis works in our puzzle synthesis.
Okay.
You negate the absolute claim that the bike is currently in the playground. That part of the thesis is canceled out by the antithesis.
Where there's observation trumps that.
But you preserve the valid elements. You preserve the truth that Andreas did see Lisa with a helmet earlier, making his inference plausible at the time. And you preserve the truth of Anna's current observation. The bike is now in the garage.
So you don't just throw out the earlier parts.
No, they were part of the process. And then you elevate the understanding. You move to a higher viewpoint that encompasses the whole sequence. Lisa was at the playground, maybe with her bike, maybe not, but the helmet was seen. Then she came to Anna's house, put the bike in the garage, and then she appeared behind Anna.
Ah, the synthesis is the whole story, the timeline that makes both earlier statements understandable in their own context.
Precisely. For Hegel, the contradiction wasn't a mistake to simply erase. It was the catalyst. It forced a move towards this fuller picture, incorporating time, context, different perspectives, all the stuff Aristotle's static logic kind of struggled with here.
So when Lisa appears, that's almost like the synthesis becoming concrete. Everyone can now share their piece, and the full picture emerges.
Exactly. The conversation and the final appearance allow for that Aufhebung. The tension resolves into a more complete narrative.
Okay, let's rerun that Hegelian flow one more time just to nail it down.
Sure. Thesis. Bike at playground, based on helmet seen earlier. Limited initial view.
Antithesis. Bike in garage, based on recent observation.
Yeah.
Contradictory. challenges the thesis.
Synthesis, Aufhebung. We grasp the sequence. Lisa was near the playground, then moved the bike to the garage. Now she's here. We negate the bike is still at playground idea, preserve the validity of the earlier observation inference and the current observation, and elevate to understand the whole timeline.
So that helmet assumption, the distraction as the source called it, it wasn't just wrong, it was a necessary first step, the thesis that got the ball rolling.
In Hegel's view, yes, it was an essential part of the process. Each perspective, Andrea relaying it, Anna observing later, contributes to the dialectic. Anna just happened to have the later, more decisive piece of information.
It really does feel like Hegel gives a much richer explanation for this specific puzzle, doesn't it? It explains the confusion, not just dismisses part of it.
I think so, too. It maps much better onto how misunderstandings like this actually happen and get resolved in real life.
Okay, let's compare them head to head then. Why does Hegel seem to fit better here?
Well, first, complexity. Aristotle aims for that clear, true, false. Hegel is much more comfortable with the messiness, right? Different viewpoints change over time.
He embraces the gray areas.
Yeah.
Second, contradiction.
Yeah, big difference. For Aristotle, contradiction means error. Stop, find the mistake. For Hegel, contradiction is often the engine of progress, pushing towards deeper insight.
Error signal versus fuel for thought. Got it. Time and process.
Aristotle's like a snapshot. Hegel's is like it's all about movement, development, the unfolding sequence. That fits the puzzle's timeline perfectly.
Definitely. And explaining misunderstanding.
Aristotle might pin it on a faulty premise or bad logic. Hegel sees the initial confusion, the partial understanding, as a natural stage on the way to a fuller picture. It's part of the journey.
That sounds so much more like, well, like life. We get bits of info, make assumptions, get confused when new info comes in, and hopefully piece it together.
Exactly. Hegel's framework, by accounting for time and perspective, explains how the confusion arose and how it gets resolved when all the pieces finally come together.
So looking back, the initial mix-up wasn't a failure, just stage one. Before Anna's info and Lisa's appearance brought the synthesis.
Precisely. That moment, they're all together, sharing info that is the synthesis happening. The resolution emerges from combining those apparently opposing viewpoints.
It really makes you think.
Yeah.
About how we deal with conflicting reports or arguments in daily life. Maybe jumping to right versus wrong isn't always the best first step.
That's a really key takeaway. Instead of just picking a side, maybe ask, what's the initial claim, thesis? What's the opposing one, antithesis? Is there a bigger picture, a synthesis that could make sense of both?
Look for the dialectic playing out instead of just a simple error.
Yeah. Now, to be clear, Aristotelian logic is absolutely essential. We need it for clarity, for rigorous argument. Can't do without it.
Sure.
But Hegel gives us tools for navigating complexity, change, context, multiple viewpoints, the stuff that makes reality, well, real.
It's definitely a different lens to try on when things seem confusing or contradictory. A very insightful deep dive.
Glad you think so. And the source material, Huck's work, did raise a few other related points worth mentioning, quickly.
All right, what else?
Well, it emphasizes that point about everyone being together at the end. That physical presence and ability to communicate directly is what enables the synthesis. Open exchange is key for Hegel.
Makes sense. The conversation resolves it.
Right. And it revisited the helmet bike distraction, reinforcing that even incorrect starting points are part of the dialectical journey. They initiate the contradiction.
The thesis needs something to start with, even if flawed. What about Andrea's role?
Yeah, the source nudges us to think about her understanding. Did she just relay what Andreas said, or did she actively infer bike? It highlights how interpretation and communication shape the information as it travels.
Adds that subjective layer. How we hear and repeat things matters.
Definitely. And it also highlights Anna's advantage, having seen Lisa more recently. Maybe she even saw Lisa arrive and put the bike away. That recent information is crucial for the resolution. The source hints she might have just focused on correcting the bike's location, knowing the more recent fact.
Which underscores how crucial the when is. Her info superseded the earlier inference because it was more current.
Exactly. And the author explicitly states the puzzle is designed to showcase these strengths of Hegel's dialectic handling time, context, perspective, compared to a purely formal, logical analysis in this scenario.
Okay, super clear. Now, those final Zusatzfragen, the extra questions in the source. The first one was about communication difficulties, like in court.
Yes, it asks, what happens when communication isn't open and aimed at shared understanding? like in adversarial settings, courtrooms, maybe politics, where people might have hidden agendas or actively try to obscure the truth.
That seems like a big problem for the Hegelian process, doesn't it? If people aren't genuinely engaging to resolve contradictions, but are instead trying to win or hide things.
It absolutely is. Hegel's synthesis relies on bringing different truths together through open dialogue. If that dialogue is corrupted by hidden motives or deliberate misinformation, the process breaks down. You don't move towards a higher shared truth.
The synthesis gets blocked. That's a really important caveat. And the very last question, connecting this all to the Easter story, since it's Easter Monday today.
Right. It invites us to think about Jesus' trial, crucifixion, and resurrection through these Aristotelian and Hegelian lenses.
How so?
Well, you could see the events leading up to the crucifixion, the trial, the conflicting accounts, the misunderstandings as potentially involving the kind of confusion and maybe even deliberate obfuscation we see in the puzzle, or the courtroom example. Different perspectives, maybe conflicting agendas.
Okay, a period of contradiction and confusion. And the resurrection.
The resurrection could be viewed, perhaps metaphorically, as a kind of Hegelian synthesis or Aufhebung.
How does that work?
It comes after the ultimate contradiction, life versus death. You could see it as negating the finality of death, preserving the significance of Jesus' life and message, and elevating understanding to a completely new reality, a new level of being.
So not just dead or alive in a simple Aristotelian sense,
Yeah.
but a transformation that overcomes the opposition.
Exactly. It represents a move through the apparent contradiction to something new and transformative, a synthesis that changes everything. Much like how resolving the puzzle's contradiction leads to a fuller understanding of Lisa's afternoon.
Wow, that's a profound connection to draw. Resurrection is Aufhebung. Especially timely today.
It's certainly a thought-provoking parallel the source offers. It shows how these philosophical ideas can resonate even in theological contexts.
It really underscores that theme of transformation through confronting contradiction.
Indeed. So we need Aristotle for clarity, but maybe we need Hegel to truly understand change, complexity, and how new realities can emerge from conflict.
This has been fantastic. From a playground to philosophy to Easter, a true deep dive. Thanks for walking us through it.
My pleasure. It shows how rich even simple scenarios can be.
And for everyone listening, maybe the takeaway is that final thought. Next time you hit a wall of contradiction, maybe pause before declaring right or wrong. Ask yourself, could there be a dialectic at play? A thesis, an antithesis, waiting for a synthesis? Could looking for that process change how you see things?
Something to ponder. Thanks for tuning in.